That's exciting. Take it away.
Hello. So I'm presenting on what I'm referring to as a no-code revolution. I really think it's a revolution in development. So when you say the phrase no code, it sort of sounds like, like making developers obsolete, but I firmly believe that no code is a next step in developer focused technology, and I'll explain a little bit about why. But first, a little bit about me. So I am Bec Martin. I'm Codebec on Twitter, and that's a reference to the fact that I used to be a developer evangelist. So I guess now I'm kind of a reformed or retired developer evangelist, but I still have the handle. These days I'm referring to myself as a technology generalist or a Jill of all trades. Got laid off at the beginning of the pandemic, and it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. I very quickly found work working for SMEs who know they need technology but don't know even where to start. And so I just do general technology advice and admin, and have ended up doing a lot of WordPress stuff and like WordPress packages, and I'm in the process of turning that into an agency type concept with a friend who has complementary skills. But enough about me, on to no code. So the way I try and conceptualize no code is through this diagram. And if you work for a cloud services company, you may have seen this diagram before, but back when like cloud was kind of becoming a thing, someone came up with this diagram, and I used it a lot when I was a tech consultant, because I produced a version of this diagram in many different colors when what I did was like pretty PowerPoint packs for a tech consulting company. But this is, this is essentially like when cloud computing became a thing, it sort of revolutionized technology because it didn't like replace infrastructure, technology development, or those skill sets. It kind of abstracted away those aspects of a technology project. When you were thinking about a technology, delivering something holistically, and so you ended up with, platform as a service or backend as a service, and then you ended up with functions as a service, which is kind of functions as a service is like Lambda from AWS, or the Microsoft equivalent. It kind of got to that level, and so each stage of this is abstracting a different aspect of it away from the end developer. And I feel that no code is kind of an extension of that. And that's how I conceptualize no code. So instead of, if you want to deliver a web project, you have to have a front-end developer or a back-end developer, or someone who understands how to deploy on AWS. It kind of abstracts all of that away. And you as an individual don't have to learn each different aspect of it. You can think about the product holistically, and a lot of the difficulty is abstracted away from you. So no code as a concept, having got this far, it's a lot of different things. A lot of different things are referred to as no code. So you've got things like mobile-focused no-code platforms like Adalo or AppSheets, which was purchased by Google. So they're very mobile-focused, and they're optimized for mobile. You have web platforms like Webflow, Bubble. You have workflow platforms, which are like Zapier, or If This Then That, which could be technically viewed as kind of maybe function as a service, depending on how you look at it. You've got the builders. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But some of the IDEs are getting so sophisticated for certain frameworks like reactive builders that are kind of so drag and drop and so sophisticated that are almost effectively no-code solutions. And you've got frameworks for CRMs. So I've been doing a lot of WordPress stuff recently, and some of the drag and drop no-code capability that's been built onto WordPress to extend WordPress very much verges on what I would refer to as no-code technology. So as a concept, it's quite very broad. This, again, is more evidence that we really are on the precipice of kind of a development revolution in the no-code space. So web builders, to start with, vary also in sophistication. So at one end of the spectrum, you can get web builders like Card, which only, it's the simplest to use. There's no need for a database. It does things like landing pages. So you can have forms on it, so it takes data, but you can't display dynamic data like data from a web page, like data from a database or whatever. But it's very good at taking data. So the cons of some of this are that there's limited payment options. It only has like the one payment gateway built in, limited functionality, logic, limited styling, but it's very good if you want just a landing page, right? Like you need to set up a page for an app that you've just built. You can whack something up on Card, got lots of templates, etc. Next level of sophistication in web page builders is something like Webflow. So Webflow can serve you dynamic data. So it's the next step up. So it's built on top of its own content management system. And the focus is really on beautiful design. So Webflow is kind of born out of this idea that there's big limitations with WordPress as a CMS, in that if you try and plug things together in WordPress, you'll very often get not clean code. You know, you try and plug a WordPress website through like an accessibility thing, and the HTML won't come out strictly validated. There's limitations in terms of like the beauty of the code and the form and the function of it. So Webflow was designed to get around that, and it's really a design platform that has CMS and some dynamic presentation capabilities. I think some people would disagree with me here. Some people think that Webflow is kind of just as the same as flexible as Bubble if you know what you're doing, but I think the next step up is Bubble. So Bubble is essentially its own visual coding language. Fully fledged, all the bells and whistles, dynamically displayed data, rich workflows, trigger API calls, schedule API flow calls in the background, but it is like its own visual coding language. So it's not, you know, like you want to make your own landing page and you kind of have to understand some basic development concepts and ideas about APIs and data calls and all of that. So the learning curve is a lot steeper, but if you as a developer want to approach a product, like you have an idea for an app and it's a marketplace, and marketplaces are a dime a dozen, right? And the tech there isn't important. What's more important is what's on it. It's kind of the perfect use case for something like Bubble, which can do all of those things that you need it to do. And a technologist will kind of, instead of, you know, having to outsource all the different parts of it or work on things that you may be not comfortable with, you can just focus on the product and what it does. So it's a powerful visual framework. It has advanced workflows, and it's really great for prototypes. But the cons are that it's much more steep learning curve, has a less intuitive design, and some things like, you know, you're kind of locked in terms of like the database, and there's difficulties like that if you're thinking about making it like production scale. So that's on the web side of things. This is a website called Dividend Finance, which was built entirely on Bubble, and it raised 365 million. So we're at the point now where people are using no-code platforms to, you know, build fully production scale things, and they're not just prototypes anymore. Like this is, you know, it's a in production, fully scaled, venture scale application. And so that's a really interesting point in the no-code revolution. You know, Bubble can scale up really high. You can buy extra dynos. I forget what the equivalent is, but it's like buying extra dynos on Heroku. Yeah, so use cases that are great for something like this is like if you need you know, API connectivity, it can do it. If it's something where you need data that's unique to each user, it can handle user accounts, complex user data, stuff like that. If you're building something where the technology itself isn't all that unique, like you're not building like, you know, a codec for 3D what's it processing, you know, it's potentially the case that Bubble can help you get going faster. So there has also been what I'm calling kind of like, while all these new platforms have been born, at the same time, this has kind of influenced or happened in parallel to the no codifying of existing ecosystems. So yeah, I think one of the biggest examples of this is people have done a lot of work in terms of making the WordPress ecosystem more drag and drop. And so you've got visual builders now, like Visual Page Builder. My favorite one is Elementor, and they've kind of around the WordPress ecosystem, they've built up these solutions that are designed to make to solve all of those problems that, you know, Webflow was trying to solve, which is, you know, clean code, accessibility, etc. And I realized that in like the last 6 months that I've been doing my contracting stuff, I've probably spent like $1,000 on Elementor Pro adjacent plugins. That's okay because I'm a contractor, so I can claim them on tax. But yeah, there's this rich ecosystem of no codified things for WordPress, and WordPress can actually do quite a lot of really interesting stuff when you start thinking about the Croco block extension for Elementor. So it does get quite complex. You know, all of those things like custom post types and rich searchability and filters and all of these crazy things, you know, that you can do by yourself in PHP, or you can save yourself a lot of time and effort and just pay like a few $100 for a massive extension pack that works quite well and actually doesn't slow your website down all that much. I've got the Divi logo on the right-hand side there, which is another similar sort of ecosystem that I haven't looked into all that much. Yeah, WordPress is actually getting quite interesting. So around the Bubble platform, it's also getting to the level where there's a really sophisticated ecosystem around that as well. And there's a bunch of these different platforms, and I'm focusing on Bubble here just because I haven't looked at any of the other ones. But in the Bubble ecosystem, for example, there's you know, there's companies like AirDev, which is an agency. So they're, you know, a development agency that focuses entirely on developing no-code apps in Bubble. But they also, due to having developed so many, they have their own best practices. So they developed this platform called like Canvas and AirDev, which is essentially a, it's kind of the equivalent of like a UI framework, but Canvas AirDev can inject UIs into someone else's Bubble account. I'm not quite sure how they do it. I think they like inject it via JSON uploads or whatever. But you can pay an additional subscription to AirDev for Canvas to get their access to their huge library of best practice Bubble development UIs. There's another one called Xerocode, which is a really well-known one that has heaps and heaps of premium templates. So you can buy a fully functional marketplace template and use it on your own app for, you know, like under a few $100s. They have a whole bunch of, you know, clones of like Twitter and everything you can imagine. They've cloned it in Bubble. But then also within these ecosystems, you have these no-code maker communities. So two of them are MakerPad and no-code. So MakerPad is it's a paid, really premium one. It's Australian-based. Newcode, not sure where they're from. They sort of do similar things. They've got like their own education platform and, you know, forums and a Slack channel and all the rest of it. And they send out their own newsletters and info for no-code makers. So that's the level of sophistication that the no-code ecosystem is getting to at the moment. So the final kind of thing that's really interesting is that some IDEs are getting to such a level of sophistication that they're almost essentially their own no-code platform. So this is one that's called Builder.io that is for the React ecosystem, that's so similar to like a no-code ecosystem kind of experience that it's really interesting that it generates the code for you. So the idea with it is to, you know, some aspects of this can be self-hosted, etc. You can export it, but this can also be used by completely non-technical users just to fiddle around with things like the user experience, marketing, onboarding. It focuses on things like doing A/B testing, the metrics, seeing where your users are going, etc. And there's also things like code generators, like base deploy, which kind of do very much the same thing. So this is, if you think about it, kind of Dreamweaver on steroids, but at a certain level, Dreamweaver is kind of a no-code experience. And I would say that's probably where it started, but I think it's kind of like that part of a change in the way that developers do their work and deliver product that I think we should all be keeping an eye on. And I've gone way over time.
Do you know what, Bec? I love that because you've covered off on all the major tools that are available, right? And there's so many of them. But what we might do is move on to the next speaker. And if we've got questions and things for your talk, then we'll bring them back in at the end just so we can keep on time a little bit more. Sorry for changing the format with that one. And I do have a lot of questions around Webflow, and I think most of it's user error based.